Now we covered two super important features: how we create a Vue instance and configure the data that we can use there, and how we can output data with interpolation. Now, you don't always want to use interpolation for outputting data though. Here's an example. Let's say we have a second paragraph where I say learn more about Vue, and I want to make sure that about Vue is a link. Now, of course, we can use an anchor tag with the ref attribute for that and wrap that around about Vue. If I do that, this is what we get. And now in here, we can pass in our link. Now, just as before, we could absolutely hard-code this here in our HTML code. But let's again store the link value in our Vue app instead, and then add some syntax to output the stored value here, simply so that later in the next step we can make this a bit more dynamic. So for that, I'm going to add a second property to this object which is returned in data, and I'll name it Vue link. And now this, again, is a string that can lead to a page where you can learn more about Vue. Now here, I'm simply going to use the official Vue webpage, but again, you can of course use anything here. Now this Vue link property now holds the link that should be output here. And we can of course try to use our curly braces here, just as we did it between the paragraph tags. Now I'm doing this on the ref attribute. So here we then point at Vue link, save this, reload, and click about Vue. As you see, this fails. And why does it fail? Well, let's inspect this with the browser developer tools real quick. I'm using Chrome here, where you can right-click something to inspect it. And you will see that the value for the ref attribute is actually the unconverted double curly brace syntax. So clearly Vue did not replace this with the actual value stored in Vue link as it did it before for this course goal part. Now, why did Vue not do that? We are inside of the Vue controlled HTML code, so Vue should detect this. Well, the reason is simple. This double curly brace syntax is only available between opening and closing HTML tags, you could say. So anywhere where you would, well, output actual content. If you want to pass in a dynamic value to an attribute, like here, where I want to set the value of the ref attribute dynamically with help of Vue, we need to use a different syntax, which thankfully is available though. And that's the Vue binding syntax. For that, we use a so-called Vue directive, which is simply an extra instruction we add in the HTML code. And we can use such directives on HTML elements, like on this anchor element. The directive we need here is vbind. Vbind is a reserved name, detected and understood by Vue, and you can tell that it's by Vue because it starts with v-. All built-in directives which ship with Vue start with v-, and we're going to see a couple of other ones too throughout the course. Now, what does this vbind directive do? As I said, a directive is basically an instruction. An instruction we give to Vue to do something. And vbind tells Vue to bind, so to set, the value of something. And the of something part basically just means of an attribute on an HTML element. And to let Vue know which attribute's value to set, we add a colon after vbind and then the attribute name, in this case ref. And this is the full syntax which Vue will understand to dynamically set a value of an HTML element attribute, in this case of the ref attribute. This tells Vue, please bind, please set the value of the ref attribute to something. And now the to something is passed between the opening and closing double quotes here. And here again, you can now reference a value of your data object. So in this case, Vue link, for example, just like this. So this here, vbind, is basically, you could say, the attribute alternative to this interpolation syntax. You use interpolation between HTML tags, And if you need to set the value on an HTML tag, so to an attribute like this, you use vbind. If you now save this and reload, if we now click this link, I'm taken to the view docs. So I'm basically forwarded to the page this link points at. So now this works, and vbind, just like interpolation, is a key feature you need to know. Because typically you don't just want to output content between opening and closing tags. Often you have the scenario that you need to bind, that you need to set the value of some HTML attribute to some view managed data. And with vbind, that's very easy to do.